The envelope was heavier than it should have been. Cream paper. My name in sharp, deliberate print, too neat to be casual, too personal to be professional. There was no return address, just a faint pencil mark in the corner, AL. I slit it open with the edge of a metal ruler and slid out the single folded sheet inside. A funeral home invoice, burial date, March 9th, deceased, Eleanor Lane. Service type, private cremation, 12-seat chapel, satin urn. Balance due, $3,842.67. Note at the bottom, scrawled in my father's handwriting, this is your part. My name is Meredith Lane. I am 36 years old, unmarried, childless, and, for the last decade, employed by the State Department of Health as a death certificate registrar. I work in the records that most people never see and fewer want to understand. Paperwork for the disappeared. For the hushed. For the erased. I hadn't known my mother died. No call. No message. No obituary. No visit. But the bill arrived. Right on time. My hands didn't shake. I sat down at the kitchen table, laid the invoice flat, and read it twice, aloud, as if that would make it less absurd. Then I checked the postmark. Mailed 3 days after the funeral date. As if that made it urgent. I placed the paper under the clip of my binder. Not a keepsake. A file. The second envelope came 2 days later, without a name. A photocopy of an obituary. My mother, in a portrait I hadn't seen in years, smiling too widely, the kind of photo they take at department stores before Christmas. Below it, beloved wife and mother. 1954 to 2025. Survived by her husband, Arthur Lane, and son, Toby Lane. No mention of a daughter. No mention of me. The sender used a dummy Gmail. The IP address was scrubbed. But the photo? I recognized it. It was scanned from a frame that used to sit on my mother's dresser, until Toby took it during a visit 3 years ago. Said it would be safer at his place. I went to the state registry database the same night. No record. No Eleanor Lane listed among the deceased. Not under our county. Not under surrounding ones. No death certificate. No physician sign off. No cremation permit. No hospital release, but I did find a temporary entry, Nora Ellis. Same date of birth. Same social security number. Filed under a family attestation of death. Authorized by Arthur Lane. Witnessed by Shannon Lane, and beside my name? The checkbox. Estranged, not in contact. It was all so clean. So bureaucratic. So surgical. They hadn't just buried my mother. They'd erased her and me in the same stroke. I opened my mother's last tax return, which I had helped her file 2 years ago. Her emergency contact was still me. Her physician was Dr. LeMay at Providence South. Her mailing address was the same. Nothing had changed. So who signed the attestation? And how did they cremate her without triggering a medical examiner alert? I reviewed the form again. The physician listed was a Dr. M. Sellers, license number 483120. But that number belonged to a dermatologist in Oregon, retired. Hadn't practiced in 10 years, fraud. The cremation was authorized under Nora Ellis, and the facility that processed her was a small private funeral home 20 miles north, Rosen and Grant. I'd never heard of them. But they were listed in an internal audit I'd seen months ago for irregular paperwork. I remembered because I'd flagged it myself, and suddenly, it wasn't just about grief. It was about systems. And I know how to make systems talk. The phone rang at 8:14 that night. I didn't answer. The voicemail came from my father. I trust you got the paperwork. She wanted it small. Don't make this difficult. Not a word about not inviting me. Not a word about death. Just don't make this difficult. I played the voicemail twice. Then I played it backwards, because that's what this always was, wasn't it? A reversal. A family that worked backward from the outcome it wanted, and erased what didn't fit. But here's the part he never understood. I don't scream. I document, and I had already started. I printed the death attestation. I cross-referenced it with the standard cremation timeline. Someone had paid for a rush process, cremation within 48 hours. No delay for second of kin notice. Which would have been me. I checked the payment logs. Rosen and Grant listed the payer as T. Lane. Toby, his name never appeared on the attestation. Legally, that should have voided the process. But if Shannon, as witness, vouched for him, I hadn't spoken to Shannon in 2 years. She used to send me birthday cards with pressed flowers from her garden. That stopped the year I refused to co-sign a second mortgage for Dad. Said I was ungrateful. Ungrateful. Estranged. Difficult. All of it pointed to one conclusion: they needed me invisible for it to go smoothly. So they used systems I thought I could trust, but the thing about systems is this: once you know where the levers are, you don't need to yell. You just need the right access code. At midnight, I accessed the internal audit dashboard and flagged Rosen and Grant for a secondary inspection. Not as myself, but under the pseudonym I used when testing anomaly resolution, M.E. Ellis, the same initials they used to kill my mother on paper. I'd let them think they buried her in silence. I'd let them send the bill. I'd let them think they won, but if they wanted to pretend my mother never had a daughter, then I'd become the kind of daughter who doesn't grieve. She documents. She traces. And she erases back, because the only thing colder than a funeral without notice is a funeral that gets undone, and I was just getting started. The first time I realized Toby had taken something that wasn't his yet was a pair of cufflinks, our grandfather's. Sterling silver, engraved with a compass rose. They were meant for the next generation of Lane men, as my father said when he polished them in the garage. At the time, I didn't care much. I was 17. I liked systems, not heirlooms. But I remember how they disappeared after Thanksgiving. I remember how, months later, Toby wore them to his college internship interview, boasting about family legacy. I never saw them again. The obituary wasn't emailed to me. It was sent to a colleague of mine, Bethany, who'd just returned from maternity leave. She found it in her inbox by mistake, an automated forward triggered by a shared contact form. She called me from her car, unsure if she should be the one to tell me. I asked her to send it anyway. I didn't say thank you. I end the scan. My mother's name had been replaced with a nickname no one ever used, Ellie. A picture I didn't recognize. Her hair was styled differently, curled at the ends, with a silk scarf tied around her neck. I squinted at it, then realized it was cropped. There was someone standing beside her, edited out. I found the original in an old photo folder from a family trip in 2015. The person beside her had been me. They'd cropped me out of my own mother's obituary. I forwarded the obituary metadata to my work terminal. The submission IP was traceable, not directly, but close enough to triangulate. It led to a connection near Fairbanks Street. Toby's block. He'd done it himself. I pulled up the file from the Department of Vital Records again. The cremation permit listed immediate family, confirmed as a checkbox. No supporting documents uploaded. It should have required a certified copy of the will, or a notarized declaration of familial authority. There was neither. That's when I noticed it. The witness signature on the attestation wasn't scanned. It was drawn with a stylus. Shannon, she hadn't mailed in a form. She'd signed it digitally. Which meant she had login access to the funeral system. I searched her name in the database. Nothing came up in the active staff list. But in the contractor log, buried under third-party access clearance, was her name, Shannon Lane, form processing assistant, temporary staff, Rosen and Grant mortuary. She hadn't been helping with the funeral. She'd been on payroll. They hadn't just forged a path around me. They'd hired her to help do it. There was no mention of me in the funeral guest registry. But there were 12 names listed. I cross-checked them one by one. Neighbors. Church. Friends. Toby's fiancé. Arthur. 12 people sat in that chapel while I was processing the deaths of strangers on my screen. 12 people watched her urn sealed while I logged a case for a man no one claimed. They called me estranged. No, estranged is when someone walks away. This was exile. I requested a formal inspection of the Rosen and Grant permit chain under an internal audit clause I had helped draft 2 years ago. I didn't file it under my name. I submitted it using the department's anonymous anomaly flag, a system designed to catch impersonation cases. Cases like this one. Within 3 hours, the funeral home was tagged for backfile review. That same afternoon, I received a text from Toby. First one in 4 years. You always make things harder than they need to be. It's done. Move on. A strange message, considering I hadn't said anything to him. Not even a reply to the obituary. But he knew. Somehow, he knew I was looking, which meant someone told him. A new possibility surfaced. What if Shannon didn't just help facilitate the cremation? What if she helped make Mom disappear long before that? I dug into Medicaid records. Hospital visits. Palliative care centers. No trace of Mom in the main network after February 1 st, yet the cremation was processed on March 9. 5 weeks unaccounted for. No in-home hospice. No nursing admission. No emergency visit. Just nothing. Then I found it, a cash withdrawal from my mother's joint account. $7,000. Labeled, Private Caregiver Services. 2 days later, the same amount was deposited into an account owned by SL Clerical Services LLC. The business name was generic. But the articles of incorporation? Signed by Shannon Lane. That wasn't elder care. That was hush money. I closed the screen. Stood still. Let the room catch up with my breathing. The photo. The obituary. The cremation. The payroll. The company. They'd all conspired not just to keep me out, but to make sure she disappeared without me even noticing. That was the real design, not to avoid grief, but to prevent witness, because if I had been there, I might have asked questions. About her pain. About who visited. About what was signed, about why Toby was suddenly listed as executor on accounts he shouldn't have known existed. The next morning, I checked one last thing, the revised trust document, quietly refiled just 4 months before her death. A transfer of power of attorney from my mother to Arthur, witnessed by Shannon, notarized by a mobile service in another county. The notary? An ex-employee of Rosen and Grant. Terminated for misconduct 2 years prior. I requested a copy of the signature sheet. The signature didn't match, not my mother's, and definitely not the woman who used to hold her pen with 2 fingers, because her joints hurt too much to grip. I stared at it for a long time. Not for answers, I already had those. But for silence. The kind of silence you hear in systems that hum too quietly when something is wrong. She didn't sign that paper, someone else signed her name, and someone else buried her as someone else. I didn't cry. I opened a new file. Not mom. Not funeral. Just sequence A, extraction. Because names get buried. But records can be exhumed. The house was supposed to be empty. That's what Shannon had said the last time she called, in that patronizing softness she used. When she wanted to sound generous, there might still be some things of hers in the guest room, she said. You can take what you want, just be respectful, Meredith. This isn't about blame. It always is, Shannon. You just want the blame written in a font you can deny later. I didn't go because of her invitation. I went because I knew they wouldn't expect me to come at all. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The house was quiet, the kind of clean that comes from too many hands wiping away too much. The air smelled like bleach and old hydrangea. My mother hated bleach. It reminded her of hospitals. I walked through the hall without touching anything. There were no condolence cards. No wilted flowers. No framed photos moved or dusted. The only sign of absence was the faint square on the wall where her portrait had hung, replaced now by a watercolor of a boat. I didn't head toward the guest room. I turned instead to the study. The drawer I expected to be locked wasn't. Inside, I found the key to the basement, and in the basement, I found the chair. It was a medical recliner. Light gray, plastic lined. Beside it, a small oxygen tank, disconnected. A drip stand. A calendar with 4 weeks crossed out in red pen. February. March. No notes. Just XS, and a worn blanket, folded neatly. Her favorite. Pale blue. The one she always used in the den, before she got too tired to leave the bedroom. There hadn't been hospice care. There hadn't been a hospital. They'd kept her here. I looked around the basement. No window. One vent. A folding screen blocking the utility sink. A clipboard with caregiver notes in generic handwriting, initials only. No names. Whoever had watched her here wasn't licensed. That was the first shift. They didn't just cut me out. They didn't just falsify documents. They hid her in a room beneath the house. A woman dying in silence, in a space where no one would ask questions, because no one else knew to ask, and suddenly the private caregiver expense made sense. The $7,000. The LLC. Shannon hadn't just witnessed a fake cremation form. She'd helped orchestrate a shadow exit. The second shift came upstairs. I passed Toby's old room on the way out. The door was ajar. I shouldn't have stopped. But a folder was sticking out from under the bed, and its corner was labeled with my mother's handwriting. It was the old joint account folder, the one I'd helped her consolidate 3 years ago, before her cognition declined. I remembered walking her through it line by line, making sure the beneficiaries were correct, making sure Toby's name was nowhere inside were new forms. Updates. Bank letters dated 6 months prior. Her name's still on them, but with Toby listed as co-owner. I checked the signature. It was hers. At least, the handwriting was close enough to pass, but the alignment was off. The baseline skewed downward. The loops were heavier. As if someone had traced it twice to make it feel authentic. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app 3 weeks before the updated signature. Mom had sent me a voicemail. I hadn't listened to it at the time. I'd assumed it was another check-in. The kind where she rambled about the news or asked if I still liked soup. I hit play. Her voice was faint, but clear. That was calculated. Shannon had given me that necklace for my 13th birthday, then quietly asked for it back a year later, saying it wasn't appropriate for someone who didn't attend church. I hadn't worn it since. But she remembered. She always remembered the small manipulations. And she always used them twice. I'll come by today, I said. I didn't say thank you. She greeted me with a long hug, a warm cardigan, and that tone people use when they want to sound maternal. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. Theatrical modesty. The house looked staged. One candle lit. One photo of Mom on the table. Teacups already set out. Chamomile, she said. She liked that. She preferred English breakfast, I replied. Shannon smiled. Well, we ran out. She poured anyway. I didn't touch mine. You look tired, she said. You should take time off work. This can't be easy for you. That was the first move, soft pity, dressed as concerned. I nodded once. I have a few personal days left. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she lifted the sugar spoon but didn't add any to her cup. She just stirred air. You know, she really did want peace at the end, she said. She asked for no drama. She said she didn't want things to get complicated between you and your father. She told you that? She told Toby. I blinked. That slip was clean. She told Toby, she repeated, correcting herself. And I agreed with her. You always had such a serious way of looking at things. She didn't want that weight in the room. That was the second move, reframing love as burden. She didn't want me there, I said flatly. It wasn't about you, wasn't it? The sugar spoon clinked against porcelain. A nervous rhythm. You have your own life, Meredith. You've always been independent, detached. You wouldn't have known how to comfort her. I watched the steam rise from my untouched tea. I'm sure she told you that too. She did. In her way. Did she say it before or after the morphine? Silence. A pause too long. That was the third move, deflection by omission. She stood. I'll get the necklace. I stayed seated. While she was gone, I placed my phone under the napkin. Recording app open. Timestamped. Audio clean, not for public exposure, for precision. Shannon returned with a velvet pouch. Placed it on the table like it was sacred. I didn't reach for it. She waited. Then sat again. She asked for Toby near the end, she said softly. That was hard for us. She wasn't very verbal. But she reached for his hand. There. It was the fake memory, the scene planted for pity. Framed to exclude me, but she hadn't counted on me checking the care schedule, and knowing Toby had been in Seattle on a real estate retreat that week. I'd found his name on a hotel registry. He hadn't even been in the state. She reached for him, huh? She did. I leaned back. Quiet. Measured. You've been processing death records for a long time, haven't you, Shannon? She stiffened. I volunteer, Meredith. I help where I'm needed. Right. Through SL Clerical Services? Her mouth parted only slightly. Just a side job, she said. I found the payment trail. From Arthur. 2 weeks after she died. She was family. You were paid. She didn't answer. That's not volunteer work, I said. That's a subcontractor role on a private estate. You filed false documents in a system I help oversee. Her eyes narrowed. I don't know what you think you're doing. I think I'm documenting. That's what I do, remember? She reached for her tea again. Still hadn't drunk it. Her hands were shaking now. You always thought you were smarter than us, she muttered. You always needed to make everything clinical. No, I said. I just learned to trust paper. Paper doesn't lie when you know where the ink is wrong. She stood again. Too quickly this time. The chair scraped. She walked to the window, back to me. She was confused, Meredith. Toward the end. She didn't always recognize people. But she recognized enough to sign away her bank access. To list Toby as joint holder. To name Dad as sole heir. To leave me off every form. That kind of clarity. She asked us to help. She asked me to call her. I have the voicemail. She said she didn't understand what she was signing. That stopped her. The fourth move, evidence they didn't know I had. She turned back slowly. You're trying to build a case. No. I said. The case builds itself. All I have to do is keep letting people talk. She walked over to the sideboard, opened a drawer, pulled out an envelope. She slid it toward me. This was hers, she said. She wrote it a week before she passed. I wasn't going to show you. But maybe it'll help. I picked it up, unsealed. Already opened. A faint crease where it had been folded and refolded. Inside, a handwritten note, shaky cursive, Meredith. I'm tired. I hope you understand. I want peace. I want to go without anyone making it harder. Please trust them. Love, Mom. It was almost convincing, almost, except my mother never signed her name Mom. She always signed it Mama. Always with the final A curled up and over the line. This one ended flat. I tucked the letter back into the envelope. I'll keep this, I said. You can have the necklace, too. No. You keep it. I've got what I came for. I stood, took the envelope, and walked out. She didn't follow. Back at home, I scanned the letter. I ran it through my handwriting software, the same tool we use for verifying notarized consent in disputed end-of-life cases. Score, 73% match, below admissibility. Threshold, meaning, someone had copied her writing, but not well enough. Probably from a card. Or a list. Maybe even from one of the notes I'd saved. They didn't just fake her death, they faked her farewell. That was the fifth and final move, counterfeit grief. But I wasn't angry. I was calm, because now I had it, a clean audio recording, a fraudulent signature match, and a fabricated goodbye, and not one of them knew I'd collected it, because when you drink tea in a house that isn't mourning, you don't toast, you document. Meredith, they want me to sign something again. I can't remember why. But I didn't like the way Toby looked at me when I asked. Can you call me when you can? I sat down on the floor. Not from grief. From strategy. That voicemail had been saved automatically. It was dated. Time-stamped. Linked to her number. It wasn't evidence yet, not officially. But in the right hands, it would raise questions. Legal ones. I uploaded the audio to my work cloud under a code name Probate C, Inquiry Track. Because now we weren't just talking about cremation. We were talking about property, bank fraud, power of attorney abuse, and illegal isolation. The third shift happened not through discovery, but omission. I searched the house for the will. I checked all the predictable places, the filing cabinet, the lockbox, her dresser. Nothing. Not even a fake. When I asked Dad for it the next day, calmly, without pretense, he responded with 6 words, everything went to Toby. She agreed. He didn't offer to show me. He didn't say I was in it, then taken out. He just said, she agreed. I didn't reply. Because I had seen her last legal signature. And I had seen the forgery. They didn't need a real will. They just needed enough forged paperwork to exhaust me. Enough false kindness to delay me. Enough ambiguity to humiliate me if I pushed. But the thing is, they taught me how systems work. Dad, with his decades of managerial shortcuts. Toby, with his borrowed charisma. Shannon, with her sanctimonious kindness. They taught me that as long as something looked real, no one questioned it. What they forgot was that I don't look. I verify, and once something enters a system, especially a fraudulent form tied to government records, it leaves a trail. Even the best forgery bleeds pixels. Before I left the house, I took nothing, not the blanket, not the documents, not even the voicemail's physical backup, but I stood at the top of the basement stairs one last time, and I said quietly, to no one, you won't stay buried like this. Not a threat. Not even a promise, just a decision. A final reversal, because they thought I would fight over what was written in the will, but I didn't want her money. I wanted her name back, and I had just found the first false signature that would let me take it. The silence in my apartment was different now. Before, it had been neutral, something I could blend into after long days sifting through death files and faulty declarations. But now it hummed. Attention filled it. Like a wire stretched too tight. I moved slower, not from caution, but calibration, because I no longer needed proof. I needed pressure. I began with something small, a certification request for a cremation record under the name Nora Ellis. I submitted it anonymously to the Office of Funeral Oversight. Then I filed a conflict report under a separate system ID, using a technicality I knew most clerks would miss. The request returned incomplete. No matching identity. No supporting hospital documentation. No registered death physician. One crack, then another. I scanned the death declaration form again. Not just the forged signature. I looked at the handwriting in the witness line, Shannon's, but then I noticed something else. The section labeled secondary kin contact had been filled in, then erased. Faint pencil marks. The end of an M, maybe. Then wiped. Then inked over with not applicable. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd written me in, then scrubbed me out. I checked the metadata. The form had been edited 5 times before submission. Each timestamp logged to a different IP. One matched the funeral home. One matched Shannon's listed address. And one, unassigned, was from the Department of Insurance server block. Someone inside the system had helped them finalize the forgery. I closed the file. No rage. Just velocity. I visited the funeral home next, not as family. As an auditor. I wore the badge I still had from a temp inspection roll 2 years ago. It wasn't official, but it looked official enough. When I walked in, the receptionist didn't blink. Just offered tea. Rosen and Grant was tidy. Polished. The kind of place that handled bodies discreetly and quickly, for families who didn't want questions. I asked to see their cremation log for March. They hesitated. I smiled. Authority works best when it's cold and unyielding. They brought me a printed sheet. I ran my finger down the entries until I found the one I already knew. Would be there, N. Ellis, March 9th, expedited process. Requester, Arthur Lane. Relation, husband. Signature on file. May I see the signature card? I asked. She blinked. Usually we don't release. I raised an eyebrow. This is a state integrity check. She left the desk. 2 minutes later, she returned with a laminated index card, scanned from a mobile form. I studied IT. It wasn't just different. It was wrong. My mother never wrote her lowercase r that way. And the dot above the I was a line, a telltale slip from someone using a touchscreen stylus too fast. I took a photo when she wasn't looking. Folded my jacket. Left the tea untouched. Back home, I placed the photo beside 2 notarized forms I had from my mother, medical declarations I'd helped her file. The differences were obvious, but it wasn't enough to prove forgery, not yet.so I took a slower route. I accessed a back-end credentialing tool used by internal clerks to verify submission trails. It wasn't part of my department, but I had beta access from an old systems test. The form signed under Arthur Lane had been uploaded from a public library in the next town over. The device had no camera, no fingerprint login, no encryption, meaning no traceable identity. It was a ghost submission, just like the name they gave her, Nora Ellis. I searched the name through the death registry's alias log. No matches. But then I remembered something. Sometimes, when identities are faked, they recycle old social security numbers that haven't been formally purged. I pulled up the SSA death index and ran the number from the cremation form. It belonged to a woman who died in 1993. In New Jersey. That was the third break. They'd used a recycled SSN attached to a name no one would check. Assigned it to my mother and sent her away under the false security of a name they thought was dead enough. I printed everything. Every mismatch. Every timestamp. Every pixel shift in the e-signatures, and then I wrote one sentence at the top of the folder: "This is not her name." A week later, I received a letter. No return address again. Inside, a single photocopy of a check, paid to the order of SL Clerical Services. Amount, $2,500. Memo, post-care documentation. Signed, Arthur Lane. They were paying Shannon to process death paperwork, not just Mom's. Maybe more, but what shook me wasn't the payment. It was the handwriting on the memo line. It was mine, copied. Traced. The same slight drag on the second loop of the E. The way I loop the ARV backward when I'm distracted. He had copied my writing. To forge payment documentation. To fake records that would later match against other internal forms. So if someone did check, they'd find consistency. They'd find me. The forgery wasn't just meant to erase me. It was meant to frame me. I burned the copy. Filed the ashes. Cleaned the scanner, then I drafted a pre-complaint report to the Office of Health Integrity. Anonymously. It included one simple statement: pattern of false kinship filings and misappropriated identifiers across multiple funeral documents tied to one internal processor. They wouldn't know it came from me. But I knew they'd look, because I had used their own audit language. I planted one final seed. A notification sent to Toby's email, the one linked to his real estate license, using an open government domain, subject line, inquiry, beneficiary validation, Eleanor Lane Estate. No message. No context, just enough to make him nervous. Just enough to make him ask questions. Maybe even inside the family, because pressure fractures people, but it also fractures stories, and theirs was starting to show lines. They thought they could write my mother's death in pencil, but I read pencil for what it is: erasable, and what's erasable can be rewritten. The call came on a Sunday morning. Shannon, voice gentle, almost coaxing. There are still some of her things here, Meredith. Jewelry. Paperwork. Maybe something you'd want to keep. I thought it might help, for closure. I didn't answer right away. She waited 5 seconds. Exactly 5. Then added, "She'd want you to have the cameo necklace. The one from your grandmother." It arrived without warning, like everything else in this family. A manila envelope slid beneath my apartment door. No return label. Just my name written in black pen, slightly slanted, like someone had rushed it. I opened it without ceremony. Inside, a copy of the revised will. 6 pages. Titled in bold, "The Last Testament of Eleanor Lane." The first 3 pages were boilerplate. Legal filler. Page 4 had the meat: assets divided equally between Arthur and Toby. No mention of me. No explanation. Just a section labeled "Irrevocable Exclusion of Meredith Lane." And then the signature, but it wasn't hers. It was a decent imitation, closer than the last. But this time, they'd overcorrected. The loops on her letters were too large. The "E" in Eleanor slanted too far back. It looked confident. My mother had barely been able to write her name clearly for months. And when she did, it wavered. This one didn't. They thought cleaner meant more believable. They didn't know I'd taught her to sign electronically when her hands gave out. I had 8 digital reference points on file. They were dated. Time-stamped. Indexed in systems they didn't even know existed. I folded the fake will and placed it in a clear plastic sleeve. Evidence. Not emotion. At 4:12 p.m., I drafted an official letter of complaint to the Office of Elder Law Review. I didn't sign it as her daughter. I signed it as a state employee concerned about a pattern of postmortem document fabrication involving a vulnerable adult, potentially extending to multiple false declarations of authority. I attached the forged will, the caregiver payment log, the SSN mismatch, the cremation signature, and the scanned letter Shannon claimed was a farewell. Each item was tagged. Each one led to another, Then I left my apartment for the first time in 3 days. I didn't go to their house. I went to the county clerk's office and requested a full copy of my mother's original deed of trust. It had been filed in 2013, before the decline, before the forgetting, before the system manipulation. In that document, she had named me as her healthcare proxy, her power of attorney, and her estate executor. No amendments had been logged. No revocations filed. The system had been overwritten, but never formally updated, which meant everything that followed was illegal: the will, the cremation, the asset transfer. All of it, and it wasn't just a family betrayal anymore. It was a felony. That evening, I called my father. He didn't answer. So I left a voicemail: "Your paperwork is inconsistent. I've opened a file with the state. I suggest you retain counsel." I didn't yell, didn't explain, didn't ask for answers, because I didn't need them anymore. He called back 20 minutes later. "You're making a mistake," he said. "She wanted it this way. She asked for peace." I let the silence stretch. "You were never close with her," he added. "You didn't visit. You didn't ask questions. She left me everything," I said. "Until you took the pen out of her hand." He exhaled. "You always thought everything had to be precise," he muttered. "That's why she couldn't talk to you. She talked to me just fine. Until she couldn't. And by then, you had already signed her out of herself." He hung up. That was the first break. The second came the next morning. Toby showed up at my work building. He didn't come inside. He waited by the sidewalk in a pressed button-down and fake concern in his posture. He held a takeout coffee cup in one hand. I didn't stop. He fell in step beside me. "You don't have to do this," he said. "It's not going to bring her back." "I'm not trying to bring her back." "Then what do you want?" I stopped, faced him. "Her name," I said. "I want her name restored." He blinked. "What, like on a document?" "In the system. In the law. In the archive. Where it belongs. Where none of you get to touch it again." He looked at me like I was unwell. "You're taking this too far." "No. You didn't take it far enough." I turned and walked inside. Left him standing there with a coffee he never drank. That afternoon, I submitted a formal amendment request to the state death registry. I attached the original deed of trust, her last verified medical signature, the date of her last living declaration. I cited subsection 14a, improper attestation of next of kin in end-of-life documentation. 3 days later, I received a call from a review officer. She had a flat voice. Professional. "Curious, we've received your file," she said. "It's extensive. I'm aware. You're alleging procedural fraud in both identity and authorization chains." "Yes." She paused. "We'll need to speak to the witness listed on the cremation form. Shannon Lane. We'll also need contact with the funeral home, and whoever processed the substitute name, Nora Ellis. I've already tagged the alias in SSA. It matches a recycled ID from a 1993 case in New Jersey." Another pause. "This time, longer. We'll escalate this." That was at 5 minutes later. I received confirmation that her death certificate had been pulled from public record, pending investigation. Her name, Eleanor Lane, was no longer legally replaced, and the system that was used to erase her now listed her as contested. I stared at the confirmation page for a long time, then I clicked print, slid the sheet into a folder, and locked it away. No announcement. No confrontation, just the silent collapse of everything they thought would hold, because they had built this on silence. But I speak in documentation. It wasn't revenge. It was documentation. On Monday morning, I arrived at the county records office 15 minutes before they opened. I didn't stand in line. I didn't make eye contact. I had an appointment, scheduled discreetly through an internal liaison at the Office of Probate Integrity. Her name was Eliza Hart. Neutral tone, sharp eyes, no small talk. She was the type of person systems hire to audit the systems themselves. "You're ready to transfer the case file?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She took the envelope I handed her without opening it. She didn't need to. Every page inside had already been verified, logged, and digitally submitted. But a physical copy, sealed, notarized, cataloged, always carries more weight. Especially when it's coming from someone on the inside. "Do you want this to remain anonymous?" "No. I'm attaching my name." That was the point. Let them know it was me. Let them read every form and realize the daughter they erased was the one who rewrote the ledger. At 10:06 a.m., the file was officially transferred to the Office of Legal Records Review for a regular inheritance protocol. It was a quiet thing. No headlines. No courtroom, just a change in case status from closed, filed, to open, under review, external submission. By 3 p.m., I received an automatic confirmation email. The system timestamped it to my internal dashboard. Subject, inheritance. Transfer protocol inquiry, Lane, Eleanor. That was the first crack. The second came through a slip. not mine, but theirs. Shannon emailed me. It wasn't meant for me. She must have hit reply all on a previous chain by accident. The subject line: Lane docs, scrub or submit. Inside, the message was brief: if Meredith has access to the 2013 version, we'll need to push the updated 2022 trust doc as primary. Still unsigned but timestamped. Can we backdate digitally or do we shred and deny knowledge? Below it, forwarded messages between her and someone named RK at Rosen and Grant. They were discussing chain of custody protocol. I didn't reply. I downloaded the entire thread. Submitted it directly to Eliza. No commentary, let their words convict. Them. That evening, I accessed a database that wasn't meant for routine employees, one reserved for long-term anomaly tracking across death and probate claims. Rosen and Grant had 6 flagged records in the past 18 months. Point 3 involved substitute kinship declarations. Point 2 involved recycled social security identifiers, and 1 involved a forged power of attorney signed under the alias of a deceased spouse. I clicked open the redacted version. The case ID ended in 0147A. My mother's was 0147B. That was the third break. It wasn't just my family. Rosen and Grant was a pattern, and Shannon wasn't a fluke, she was a mechanism. I submitted a secondary report. Not to the same office, but to the State Licensing Bureau. Title: Suspected Pattern of Funeral Identity Fraud, Intersecting Clerical Actor, Shannon Lane. Attached, timestamps. Submission metadata. Employee IDs. Emails. Payment receipts, and one detail they wouldn't have expected. A copy of Toby's real estate license application, not because it was criminal, but because it included a notarization filed under the same mobile notary service that had witnessed Moms will. I flagged the license number. It had been suspended once, in 2020, for document manipulation in a sale dispute. They'd buried that fact, but not deep enough. I printed every form and sealed it in a folder labeled Secondary Chain Manipulation Patterns. Not for the courts, for the archive, because I knew this would take time, and they would stall, they would feign confusion. Blame each other. Pretend it was grief. Call it family miscommunication. But systems don't care about sentiment, they care about sequence, and I had logged every step. That night, I made one personal call. To an old colleague, Dana, now working with the Office of Communications Integrity, she used to handle internal affairs messaging for contested family court cases. I asked one question: if a false death identity is proven, how long before the revised record becomes public? She paused. Depends. But in high-confidence submissions? 48 hours. Why? Because I need a copy of the corrected certificate. And I need it certified, not just stamped. Is this for you? It's for my mother. Another pause, then, I'll have it pulled. 2 days later, it arrived in the mail: certificate of death, amended. Name, Eleanor Lane. Kin, daughter, Meredith Lane, primary contact. Disposition, pending revision. Cremation, void, unauthorized authorization. Executor, status disputed. That was the 4th break. The document that was meant to exclude me now bore my name, in black ink, official seal, irrevocable. I didn't frame it. I filed it, and then I sent a copy, unrequested, to my father's address. No letter. No warning. No gloating, just the document. Let him open it, let him see her name reappear in the system he tried to rewrite, let him realize he was no longer the steward of her memory, that role had been transferred, officially, and permanently. The new certificate didn't change the past. It didn't bring her voice back. It didn't replace the nights I didn't get to sit with her, or the questions I never got to ask at the end, but it gave her a name again, legally. Publicly. Permanently. That's how systems heal what people destroy, line by line. I opened the official archive submission form and uploaded a certified copy of the amended death certificate. I added my mother's photo. The real one. Not the cropped version from the obituary. This one showed her sitting on the back porch in a navy sweater, smiling, even though the light hurt her eyes. I'd taken it a year before she died. Caption: Eleanor Lane, daughter, teacher, wife. Registered 2025. Confirmed by Meredith Lane. No drama. No accusation. Just record, but it wasn't just for the archive. It triggered a secondary chain, auto notifications sent to credit bureaus, life insurance flaggers, hospital billing systems. All institutions that had accepted the fake identity, Nora Ellis, were now required to invalidate the false record and revert to the correct one. They wouldn't know why, they wouldn't care, but quietly, across servers, the forgery began to die. One flag. Then another. Then the cascade. At 1:43 p.m., I received the first bounce back from a closed financial account marked under Nora Ellis's name: invalid entity, certificate correction filed. Disposition, fraud proceeding open. That was the First consequence. At 2:17 p.m., a secondary alert pinged in my legacy contact inbox from the county registrar. Your authority as executor is under review. Temporary hold placed on all fund dispersals. Parties notified. That was the second. At 3:02 p.m., I got a text from Shannon. No greeting. Just, what did you do? I didn't respond. By 4 p.m., I'd uploaded the last form, a formal request for asset reclassification under disputed execution. Not to seize anything. I didn't want the house. Or the car. Or the savings, just the paper trail. If they forged her will, they'd also logged estate transfers under the false name. That meant the deed of disposition, the document they filed to release all property to Arthur, was invalid, and if the name was void, so was the transfer. The chain of title was broken, and once it's broken in state records, it triggers a freeze across multiple systems: property, tax, inheritance, even burial reimbursements, which meant that the check Dad had issued under Eleanor's name to cover the funeral would now bounce. I didn't send it back, the system would do it for me. That night, my phone rang. It was Arthur. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was different. Measured, but frayed. You win, he said. Is that what you wanted? To humiliate us? I replayed that line once, not for pleasure. For clarity, because it was the first time he used a plural. Us. He wasn't speaking just for himself. He was speaking for the people who signed, erased, watched, and filed. And now? They couldn't move, because the system they'd exploited to bury her was now the system choking them. At 6:22 p.m., I received an internal email from the State Ethics Board. We have opened a formal inquiry into the activities of Shannon Lane and her affiliation with Rosen and Grant Mortuary. Your documentation is under protective review. Not witness. Not complainant. Just source. That's all I needed to be. I checked the fraud portal dashboard. All status updates were green. Certificate, amended cremation, voided executorship, contested asset transfer, suspended witness credibility, flagged disposition, pending full reclassification. He didn't screenshot it. I didn't print it. I just watched the lines flick into place, the quiet undoing of the lie. That evening, I pulled out the original tea-stained notepad I'd kept from the start. The one where I scribbled dates, traced connections, jotted inconsistencies. It was a mess. Crossed out names, arrows, legal codes in shorthand. A sketch of the house's basement I'd drawn from memory. I added one more note at the bottom: final. Correction filed. No appeal. Let them rot inside the silence they built. Then I closed it. I sat in the kitchen, same table, same chair, same overhead light, only now, I wasn't waiting, because there was nothing left to uncover, nothing left to prove. I didn't win. This wasn't victory. It was restoration. Of the right name, the right signature, the right daughter. That was the third consequence. They thought the funeral was the end, but it was just the audit. The envelope arrived in the morning mail, thick, cream-colored, and unmarked, no return address. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it was. Inside, I found 2 documents folded with surgical precision. The first, a legal notice of withdrawal. Arthur Lane, executor, was formally stepping down due to a conflict of interest and unresolved inquiries. No apology. Just an ending. Silent. Administrative. Like he'd always preferred. The second page was the amended estate summary. I read it twice. Then I circled the last entry: beneficiary name, Eleanor Lane, deceased, next of kin, Meredith Lane. Status, record restored, disposition deferred. I didn't smile. But I did exhale. They'd tried to write me out of the end of her life. But I'd written myself back in. Not by force. Not by plea. Just by refusing to disappear. The system had closed on them quietly. No police, no headlines, no spectacle. But now the house deed was frozen, the will nullified, the cremation record flagged for misuse, and Shannon's mortuary license suspended pending review. Toby's name was stripped from all inheritance filings due to conflicting parental verification. The lie had rotted from the inside, and I never once needed to speak to any of them again, but I did go back to the funeral home, not to make a scene. To verify, the front desk receptionist was new. She looked about 23, bored, clicking through intake forms. When I gave her the name, she frowned. Sorry, we have no record of an Eleanor Lane. I waited. Then slid the correction form across the counter. She looked again. Oh, she said. There was a cremation logged under a Nora Ellis. But it's locked now. Under fraud protocol. I nodded. That's the one. She hesitated. Do you want to file a grievance? No, I said. I already filed the truth. I walked out. The air outside smelled like cut grass. Unseasonably clean. Later that week, I returned to work. No one knew what had happened. I hadn't taken time off. Hadn't mentioned my mother. I was still the same Meredith to them. Quiet, early, meticulous, anonymous in the way people only notice when something's missing, but I started doing something new whenever I processed a death certificate. I paused for 5 extra seconds. I checked the name of the informant. I checked the timing. I checked for anyone missing from the record. Most days, it was routine, but twice, in the months that followed, I flagged filings where something didn't feel right, where a daughter wasn't listed, or a witness signature didn't match, or the funeral arrangements didn't align with the person's actual last address. In both cases, a review was triggered, and in both cases, the review resulted in reclassification. I never signed my name to either, but I kept a small log under my desk drawer, name, file, action, corrected, because the system had limits. But I didn't, and that was the legacy, not hers. Mine, not the house. Not the money, but the power to record things as they were. To put names back where they belong. To leave no one erased, even if no one ever thanked me, even if no one ever knew, even if they sent me the bill. I sat alone at the cemetery the next spring, under a sky that didn't bother trying to be dramatic. The grass had grown in around the temporary plaque. I hadn't ordered a stone yet. I wasn't sure I ever would, but I brought a small brass nameplate. I'd had it made by a hardware shop in a nearby town. Nothing grand. Just her name, her birth year, and a single sentence below: she was not forgotten. I pressed it into the soil myself, not for her, for me. People think the worst betrayal is when someone yells in your face or slams a door, but it isn't. The real betrayal is silence. Quiet edits. Subtle exclusions. Paperwork that forgets your name. Or worse, rewrites it. That's how families erase you, not with violence, with forms, with smiles, with signatures made when you're not in the room. My father never raised his voice. My brother never cursed me. My aunt used to bake me cookies when I stayed over as a child, but they buried my mother under a name that wasn't hers, and sent me the invoice like a final joke. That kind of betrayal doesn't bleed. It calcifies, and most people don't fight back, not because they're weak, but because they think it won't matter. That nobody will listen. That once the story's told wrong, you don't get to correct it. They're wrong. If you can't scream, document. If you can't confront, record. If they lie in ink, answer in systems. That's how I won, not by exploding. By submitting. By understanding how the machine works and turning it back on the ones who thought I'd stay silent. To anyone watching this who's ever been erased, overlooked, rewritten, you don't need permission to reclaim your voice. Just proof. And patience. If this story found you in a quiet place, the kind where you've stopped explaining yourself, stopped asking to be included, I hope it reminds you, you don't have to make a scene to be powerful. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is a corrected form, filed right on time. And if you're still listening, consider subscribing to the channel, not for me, but for the next name someone tries to erase.